I'll go first. So I was listening to Sirius XM the other day, like the satellite radio, which I love because you can kind of choose whichever world you want to live in, which was like your most magnificent time of your life. So it means I listen to Lithium a lot. Lithium being the best music of the 90s alternative and grunge era, which is 90% of the reason I'm wearing this shirt, I think, I realized. And Rape Me by Nirvana came on, which made me super nostalgic. And that's a really weird song to be nostalgic about. But that's what happens when you listen to 90s grunge and alternative all the time. Kids, ask your parents. So that got me thinking about how I'd managed to be kind of a young person into music in the height of grunge, and how I got to participate in the glory days of grunge, shall we say. So in the fall of 1993, my friend Corey came up to me at high school in the lunchroom and said, Nirvana is playing in Kalamazoo in October, and you need to go. Well, we all need to go because Kurt Cobain is going to die. So I went home and I said, Mom, Nirvana's playing in Kalamazoo in October, and I need to go because Kurt Cobain is going to die. Corey wasn't a psychic or anything, but if you just followed the music magazines at the time, you would know that he wasn't doing well. There was heroin, there was stomach issues, whatever. But I still couldn't win my mom over with that. But we had, at the time, living with us a Swedish exchange student named Carl, who was also a super big fan of Nirvana and Pearl Jam, as he called them. And so he was excited. He's like, can we go see Nirvana? And with the addition of Carl, we were able to get tickets. But I had just turned 16 that summer, and there was no way that my mom was gonna let me drive an hour and a half west of where we were living to Kalamazoo to go to a concert. So my mom packed me and Carl into the minivan, and my parents drove us to Kalamazoo, where they dropped us off at Wing Stadium, and we got to go in to see Nirvana and get into mosh pits and get smushed against sweaty leather people and get scowled out by Kurt Cobain. And they went to the Red Lobster next door and had dinner. And then they sat in the parking lot for another 2 hours waiting for us to get out of the show. And at the time I didn't think anything. I was like, yeah, of course you do that. That's what your lame parents do. They wait for you in the parking lot while you go see Nirvana. And then in the spring, the next year, I found out that Pearl Jam was coming to Detroit, or Pearl Yam, as it were. And I was like, that's the show I really wanted to go to, because I was arguably a bigger Pearl Jam fan than a Nirvana fan. But Pearl Jam was in a big fight with Ticketmaster at the time, so you couldn't just stand outside of the record store and wait for tickets the way you did back then. You had to literally get a form that you cut out of the Detroit Free Press and then mail it in for a chance for an opportunity to get tickets. So my friends Corey and Dana and I drove all around Lansing after school that day to find copies of the Detroit Free Press. And people were like, oh, we didn't get a paper today. I don't know what happened. But I still remember to this day the look on Corey's face when we stopped outside of a breakfast and lunch place, and they had one of paper in the window, and then we opened the door and there were 15 more papers. So we grabbed the whole pile, which I know it was stealing, but I've worked in journalism for 18 years, so I feel like karmically I've paid back the Detroit Free Press for this. So you're welcome, Detroit. So Dana and I split up the papers that we got because Dana already had tickets because she was in the fan club. And we filled out the form, and then 2 weeks later, they printed the last 4 digits of your social security number in the Detroit Free Press. Honestly true, now seems weird. They're 2 full-page ads with the last 4 digits of your number in the Detroit Free Press. And Dana and I both had our social security number printed in the Detroit Free Press. Yeah! And the catch was you had to buy your tickets that afternoon at the theater in Detroit. So I called my mom on the school payphone at lunch, and I was like, can you take us to Detroit after school so we can buy tickets to see Pearl Jam? I know she didn't want to do this. She had plans or whatever. Nobody wants to drive to a sketchy neighborhood in Detroit in the afternoon with a bunch of teenage girls to get tickets. But she did it. So she drove us all the way down to Detroit, and they'd pre-chosen your tickets for you. So you didn't get to pick where you sat or anything. So I was not in the last row of the balcony, but I was in the second to last row of the balcony. But I didn't care. When we went to the concert finally, a month later, I got to see Eddie Vedder climbing on things and singing Jeremy in rearview mirror, even though he was like this big. And it just gave me, these were like my first live concert experiences. And it gave me a real appreciation for live music since then. And listening to that song on the Sirius radio brought it all back. And it made me appreciate that I got to be a part of the glory days of grunge. It also reminded me that I needed to thank my mom a little bit.